Great question, Hannah. So I'm really lucky because my PhD is actually at the University of Regina. Saskatchewan has been looking at nuclear power for the past decade because of their relationship already to the resources that they have in the uranium mining. However, as I said, the MOU has been signed, so a memorandum of understanding between New Brunswick, Ontario, Alberta, and Saskatchewan, as well as in the SMR action plan. We actually have a lot of involvement across Canada, not just those 4 provinces. So New Brunswick also already has a reactor, but they're looking at advanced reactors, so molten salt primarily. And then Saskatchewan has also made the decision to go ahead with the same reactor type that Darlington is hoping to have on their site by 2030. So SMR in Saskatchewan is coming, and they're doing those studies right now. But I think the big thing is about the economics of it, of course, is a big one, but looking at the possibility of having remote communities involved with SMRs is a really important initiative. So as those SMRs are produced and that we're kind of out of first of a kind territory, we're going to start to see, I think, SMR production pick up because they are needed to decarbonize. One of the stats that I find just mind-boggling as an environmental scientist is really thinking about how, in order to decarbonize and meet our 2050 goals, we would have to be building 1 reactor every year and 5 small modular reactors every year from now until then. And so it really shows the amount of energy that we need, and there's not really the opportunity to reduce that amount of energy so significantly that we won't need to have those types of resources available. Now, provinces such as Manitoba has over 99% of their electricity is actually from hydro, and they don't use they have mostly electric heat because of that and the surplus of energy that they have, similarly to Quebec. And so it's hard to want to make a change to nuclear when you already have this huge hydro resource. Now, if you can't really expand your hydro resources anymore because of just the way that river systems are, and also just the environmental implications and assessment process to expand hydro would be quite extensive. So nuclear might play a role in the future as those provinces continue to grow. I wish I had my bag in here. Okay, so you take the rock, the uranium, and you process it to get out the primarily uranium. It gets processed into something called yellow cake. It's not yellow cake, do not eat it. It is uranium dioxide, and that uranium is then brought to a refining plant, and those then create fuel from that. So we don't do any enrichment in Canada. It's not in our mandate. And that's mainly because once you start to enrich, you have the likelihood of those products that are allowed for nuclear proliferation. And so in Canada, we've chosen a reactor type that doesn't have those types of products. And so that it's pretty similar to any other type of like metal extraction, because we all have to keep in mind that uranium is still a heavy metal.
Yeah. Yellow cake from like Get Smart. I meant more of like, how do they get it? Like, I'm glad you got my reference. How do you get it from like, say, Saskatchewan to Bruce or something like along those lines? Like, is it like a truck or?
Yep. Yeah, so truck and rail. So for example, and I wish I had it because I could show you, I have a chunk of uranium, and I also have a chunk of plastic that has some yellow cake in it. It itself is not radioactive. Okay, so it's going to have disintegrations just like any atom. So around you right now, you have natural background radiation, and that's because we have uranium in the soils and in our rocks around us, and so do we around the world, as well as cosmic radiation. And so if I had my Geiger counter, it's measuring those disintegrations, so it would be beeping in the background, which is also probably why I don't have it, because it's very annoying. However, those materials can be transported very safely. So all of our nuclear materials, when we ship them very safely. We've done a lot of work in terms of figuring out how to ship materials and how to prevent any incidents from happening. But those materials themselves are not going to cause harm. They're not radioactive. The best thing I can say is that they themselves are able to have a nuclear reaction But actually, I was just talking about nuclear physics for babies, which you can't see. Oh, there it is. And this is actually how I teach nuclear physics quite often, is the idea that they in themselves are actually relatively stable. They've got a long half-life. What they require is a neutron to make them unstable. And so the fuel, you can hold nuclear fuel in your hand that hasn't been irradiated, very important, not irradiated. You can hold it, it's not going to hurt you. It's once it's gone in the reactor and it's been exposed to those extra neutrons and become destabilized that it becomes radioactive. And so that the actual yellow cake is not itself going to hurt you. I mean, uranium is still a heavy metal, so don't lick it. That's what I usually say. Good advice, but it is it itself is not going to hurt you. But once we actually have irradiated specimens, so at Chalk River, we do a lot of irradiated testing. Those shipment compartments, really cool if you ever want to look it up. It's called, like, just look on Google, like nuclear transportation testing. And we used to have a drop test facility on site where literally we would drop these canisters from really high up. There's also tests where, like, there's a canister on the back of a truck and we just ram the truck, like no one's driving, into a like concrete wall to see what would happen to the canisters. And these canisters are undergoing like insane tests to prove that they can't be penetrated. Great. Honestly, the nuclear industry is hiring all the time. I have never had a year. I've been working at CNL for 10 years. It goes by so quickly. But the big one is that there's always opportunities. In Chalk River is actually going to be participating with Canadian Nuclear Labs in a job fair in Toronto. I think it's next week. I'm about to be told I'm wrong. It might be this week. But honestly, cnl.ca/careers. Bruce Power has tons of careers and opportunities. So does OPG, so Ontario Power Generation. You don't have to be nuclear to get into nuclear. That's going to be my big takeaway from this. I have my master's degree in science. I'm a biologist. I was a hip waiter wearing hippie ecologist. And now I'm like a hardcore nuclear energy advocate. And so you don't have to be nuclear to get into nuclear. And so I think that's what people expect, is I need to know how nuclear fission works in order to get here. And that's not true. In nuclear industry, we need lawyers, we need admin staff, we need engineers, we need scientists of all types, because we have to keep in mind that a nuclear site is also an industrial site, meaning that anything you can do in any other industry, you can do with nuclear. But we get like cooler stuff because we have more money to play with. And that's a really great question. I'm going to roll back a tiny bit. I'm going to roll back to nuclear energy is the only energy that's a religion almost. You either 100% support it or you 100% don't. You don't really hear about those middle grounds. And it's so much so that Jiangxi, those are 2 reactors that were in Quebec. One of them got shut down for other things, but the second one was shut down based on a political decision that said, you elect me, I will shut down that reactor. They got elected within a week, it was shut down. There is no other type of energy source that could happen, right? But because Quebec had so much hydro, it was able to do that. So why did Greta kind of turn her decision? Well, because what's happening in the EU right now? If you're keeping track of energy right now in the world, and I understand if you're not, their reliance on natural gas from Russia is high, okay? And Energy Windy, which was the agreement that they had, Germany hates nuclear, right? They hated nuclear forever, so much so that they literally have been teaching their children in grade school, instead of nuclear science, nuclear physics for babies, it would say hate nuclear for babies, because they have stories about how much damage and hurt it can do to the environment and to people. But what they've learned is that actually shutting down nuclear plants has increased their reliance on coal. And this is because, and it's not clean. So their greenhouse gases have actually gone up despite the amount of money that they have put into solar and wind and renewables. They've actually increased their greenhouse gases. But more importantly than that is baseload power. Shutting down nuclear means that you are going to rely on something else for baseload. Solar can only happen when the sun is shining. Wind can only happen when wind is blowing. And I'm not saying there's not a role for both. I do believe personally that there is a role for both. But I also think that that base load that keeps our hospitals going, our NICUs operating, our school lights on a cold winter day, not yet, it's still beautiful outside. But
it's definitely here in Calgary. So
I heard minus 27 next week. Okay. And so all of that is that base load is required. So what they realized when they shut down their plants was that they're just using more coal. And if you're going to make any target, you have to want to have a stable base load. So there's opportunities here with nuclear, and especially this idea. And this is where Greta came from. I don't think Greta would be fully on board getting new nuclear, but she said it would be foolish to shut down current operating plants. If you have a currently operating facility that is operating, there's no challenges, it's working really well, you're throwing away capital when you shut it down early, right? You're throwing away jobs. Each reactor probably has between 500 and 2,500 workers. And you are getting rid of clean energy. And so I think it's also because this idea of renewable versus non-renewable, right? Uranium is itself, because of seawater, you could technically say it's renewable, but that's a talk for a different day. But it gets bucketed with the non-renewables. It gets bucketed with fossil fuels. But really it should be low carbon and high carbon. And that's the conversation needs to change. So renewable is a fake term. It doesn't actually mean much, but low carbon means something in the context of the climate crisis. So CNL has had a legacy of medical isotopes. We produced upwards of, like, I think at one point it was like 70% of the world's supply of molybdenum-99, which is for scans. But right now we're moving into, we have no operating facilities, no operating reactors. So actually CNL is looking at getting a accelerator on site in order to produce the actinium-225. We currently do produce actinium-225. As I said, we're a really old site. We started operations in the 1940s. And because of that, we actually have some waste materials from radium needles, et cetera. And we're able to extract, or milk is what it's called, the radium cow. It's the actual terminology. I'm not just making it up. And we can get actinium from that. We get small amounts. So it's in the trial phases. Of course, during trial phases, we don't need nearly as much. And those are allowing us to also do medical research, because part of the research for actinium is really, what's that targeting molecule? How do we find the right thing to attach to actinium? If you are interested in learning more about actinium-225 specifically, you can look up the rarest drug on Earth. And that's a YouTube video that kind of talks a little bit about actinium-225, how it's produced, how it's used. But it's kind of the future of medicine, because actinium is an alpha emitter. So there's 3 types of radiation that I'm going to just briefly go over. You have beta, gamma, and alpha. Alpha is the strongest radioactively, but it can't travel far because it's heavy, okay? So it can't go through my skin, but it's very powerful. So if I put it next to a tumor, it will do big damage. Beta can go through my skin, but not much more. And gamma can go right through my body. And so our current technology uses beta and gamma and targets your organ. But because of that, for example, if I had a ray of radiation coming here, it would cause a tract of radiation all the way through my body. Whereas alpha, I can actually use it to target the cancer cell specifically. I can't use the demonstration on me because right now it's being used mostly about prostate cancer. So I'm not saying this biasly, but yes, I think nuclear is the future of energy in the world. It has been shown to be highly economical over the lifespan of the reactor operation. It's also been shown to be very clean with respect to greenhouse gas emissions. Waste is something that we all know how to deal with around the world. there are deep geological repositories being proposed across the world. One of the ones you've heard of probably is Yucca Mountain. Yucca Mountain is a political issue. That's why that doesn't work. Also, it's not the right spot for it, but that whole thing is a political issue. Finland is very close to having their deep geological repository in place. Canada has a 30 or 40-year plan with the Nuclear Waste Management Organization to have this waste repository. And so nuclear there's not a finishing point. Now what's really cool is now, instead of talking cradle to grave, we're also talking about when that fuel is used, that fuel can then be recycled. Now, Canada does not have a mandate for recycling fuel, but France has recycled their fuel. They have a reprocessing plant in France, so they can reuse their fuel, because by the time it comes out of reactor, there's still about 90 to 98% of available uranium. So you can reprocess it, doesn't have to just go to waste. And I think small modular reactors are this really cool opportunity for Canada, because we don't have, not everywhere in Canada has access to a grid. So in Ontario, you can actually see the map where grid is only about half of Ontario. And so if we're looking at decarbonizing, we need to look at those really dirty sectors. Replacing hydro with nuclear makes no sense, but replacing diesel generation with nuclear sure does. So I think that there's a future there. But I also think that outside of SMRs, there's a huge future in nuclear. I think that large operating stations are a really important part of that decarbonization and net zero goals. And I think personally, I think the CANDU technology is amazing, because we can use natural uranium, which reduces the likelihood of any proliferation issues. So I think that nuclear it has contributed greatly to economic growth and industrialization, but I think that there's still, it's only halfway there. We still need to work on developing countries, and we still need to be working on cleaning up the sectors that it doesn't make sense to close down a nuclear plant when you're replacing it with coal or natural gas. No matter how cheap the coal and natural gas is, if you're really serious about climate, which you should be, if you read anything about climate tipping points, then nuclear is needed. I don't know why I didn't have all my props beside me. Okay, so for context, there's a pellet. The pellet is about this big. Okay, it's 8 grams. 8 of those could power your home and for an entire year. 8 of those tiny little pellets. That is compared to like 4 truckloads of, I think they say it's natural. I don't know the numbers. I'm going to have to get them for you. But this is 8 little ones. You have to keep in mind when you talk about natural gas, you talk about coal, you also have to consider all of that air pollution as part of that waste. Okay, so all that air pollution is huge, meaning that on average, 6.1 million people die every year from air pollution. Okay, so that's important. Because the waste is not just the actual high level pellet, but on that same note is on a pop can. So everyone's seen a typical pop can. If all the energy you were to have for your entire life came from nuclear, all the high level waste could fit in that pop can. And that's it, because we don't have greenhouse gas emissions. So all of it could fit right there. And so that's an important perspective when you're thinking about waste in general, is that it itself is not that much. And so there's a lot of metrics and numbers about how much waste comparatively, or how much fuel you would need to equal nuclear. But with solar and wind, it's really important to think they both have lifespans. Okay. And all you have to do is look at what happens to a solar panel. What's in solar panels? Do they have even a disposition route? And this is where I usually pull out my water bottle. This is a plastic water bottle. And when this water bottle was created, it didn't have a pathway for disposition, right? This water bottle, where's it going to go when I'm done with it? It's going to go to, sure, it could go into the recycling. No, it can't. There's no symbols. It's going in the garbage. So when I'm done with this, it's going in the garbage. Based on research about microplastics, plastic will last in the environment for as long as uranium would, right? Millions of years. And it doesn't have a disposition pathway. This bottle, the manufacturer didn't have to pay for its life after use. Nuclear does. Nuclear, before they even build, they need to put money aside for decommissioning and waste management. So we have a fully funded waste stream from start to finish with nuclear. And we've had to plan that all the way along. That cannot be said for coal, natural gas, even hydro. They can't say that they have a fully developed plan for waste. So I don't have the metrics. They're pretty easy to find if you just want to look up how much energy or how much waste is associated with these different types, but I just don't have the paper with me right now. It's that it is such an important part of Canada's history, but also that it is the solution to climate change, and that there are people who can talk about nuclear science to you if you don't understand it, or if you want to know more. There's tons of organizations around that you can learn more, and that there seems to be that dichotomy about pro and anti-nuke people. And we have to realize that that's not going to get us anywhere. So we really need to have a conversation in the middle. And that's kind of part of what my whole mandate is, and is to really get people to realize that there's a lot of intersection between what you don't like and what people that are pro-nuclear do like. And having those conversations are more important than just making a decision based on reading an opinion article. But breaking down the science can be really hard. And so there's a lot of places that are out there to help people break down the science and have conversations. And I think that's what I would want the most, is just to have that open mind and to ask those questions, because there's people around who can happily talk about nuclear.
That was such an amazing statement. And that's honestly so much what we try to do here, is provide a platform for people to have open conversation. So that was such a fun full circle moment. Amazing. And I'm definitely going to check out Nuclear Physics for Babies, because I would like to learn more. That's awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. Are there any kind of final thoughts before I let you go here?
Just as I said, Canadian Nuclear Laboratories is a wealth of information. You can go check us out at cnl.ca. And if you are interested in joining our team, there are lots of opportunities, and it doesn't have, you can even be a history major. I just found out recently that one of our work week leaders was. So there we go. He did like art history. Anyway, so you can kind of do anything and be part of the nuclear industry, and really, in my opinion, be part of the saving the world. So if you want to save the world, join nuclear. That's all I have. But thanks so much for having me. And you can find me also on Twitter at Larkin Mosscrop. Only one.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today. That was really amazing. And we so appreciate your time and knowledge and energy that you brought to the table. So that was really fantastic.